I've seen so much misinformation out here to do with various aspects. And one of the greatest areas of misinformation is this whole thing based upon ballistics coefficient. I've talked about some of these aspects before, and I'm talking about it again. The reason I'm talking about it is many years ago, there was an individual by the name of Roy Weatherby. Roy Weatherby designed a considerable number of cartridges from 224 to 460. And most all of his cartridges, from a velocity standpoint, from a hunting standpoint, because all this was done because he was a hunter, he loved to hunt, he loved guns. And basically at that point in time, and even today, we have bullets that are basically, people don't consider them to be high ballistics coefficient bullets. They don't consider them to be right for hunting. Well, that's just simply not the case. We have many bullets in many different calibers that are designed to hunt game. Most bullets are designed to hunt game. Reliably take game at reasonable distances. But where we've got completely off base is with this ballistics coefficient. Now I'm going to explain exactly where I'm coming from. Let's take, for instance, the 270 Weatherby Magnum. That's a very good cartridge. I built quite a few of these rifles in this caliber, and I have taken game with that cartridge. Now, there are a tremendous amount of good choices, bullet-wise, for the 270 Weatherby. I'm going to point out the 150 grain nozzle partition. Of how powder burn rate applies to case capacity. The case capacity, bore size, bullet weights, and one thing and another dictate what powder should be used. Look at any reloading manual, and the information compiled there is basically what I describe as a go-by. Maybe you could describe as generic information for the reloader. It's all ranged from the fastest, comes down the line, graduating down the line, the fastest, not quite as fast, not as fast as that, to the point where gradually it's considerably slow, and the slowest that's applicable for the particular cartridge at hand. Now, not all reloading manuals have every powder. It would be just about impossible because there's so many powders out here that it is just crazy. But I repeatedly get correspondence, email correspondence, from people that are reloading, and almost invariably they're using powder that's in about the medium to medium fast burn rate in a cartridge that really requires slower, perhaps about the 4 slowest powders applicable to that cartridge. And along in some of the reloading manuals, there's actual volume information on how percentage-wise it fills the case. If it fills the case at 90%, 95%, 97%, 104% or whatever. And obviously 104% is a compressed charge. In some instances, that compressed charge could be very good. And various aspects in relationship to headspace. But it's part of the situation. And I think one of the most misunderstood aspects that there are is to do with headspace. Well, I'm going to explain some things here, and I'm going to make it quite simple and quite clear. Now, these dimensions are set basically by SAAMI to do with minimum and maximum headspace dimensions and or field headspace dimensions. Now, for instance, the 30-06 minimum headspace gauge is stamped 1.940. The maximum gauge is 1.946. The field gauge is 1.950. Now, there are 6 thousandths difference between minimum and maximum headspace. There is 10 thousandths difference between field headspace and minimum headspace. Now, the situation is that this can be a little bit misleading to some extent to some people. Basically, anything considered within minimum to maximum headspace is considered acceptable headspace. But being the aspect that there is 6 thousandths difference between minimum and maximum to do with the 30-06 headspace. So, when a person chambers a barrel, I, as a rule, chamber to minimum headspace. In other words, when I close the bolt on a gauge, and the details, because it's quite important to be able to properly measure case heads for expansion with a micrometer. Now, I'm going to go into the history of this because I know it very well. Many, many years ago, a new individual by the name of Vernon Spear started making rifle bullets in Lewiston, Idaho. He actually began doing this and was partnered with, at that time, Joyce Hornady. Joyce Hornady later struck out on his own, started his own business, and I think everybody understands that, that Hornady is growing into a huge facility in Grand Island, Nebraska. And at the same time, Vernon Spear's business grew considerably over the years. And Vernon Spear had a pretty keen engineering machinist type of a mind. And I met Vernon briefly when I was working in Lewiston, Idaho for Spear Bullet Company as a tool and die maker and building bullet making machines and pressure test guns and accuracy guns and one thing another. And a few years into the production of rifle bullets, Vernon realized that there was a need for a reloading manual to guide people interested in reloading ammunition. And so, along the line, previous to this, Vernon, of course, he was a reloader, actually become what we would describe as a master hand loader and handed down one of the most valuable pieces of information and technique that has ever been thought of by any individual ever. The idea of using a 1/10 micrometer to measure the cartridge case head as you work up in loads, pressure increases. So that means at some point in time that those cartridge cases that you're loading are going to expand.